In the ancient world, nightfall arrived not as a gentle invitation to rest, but as a boundary that separated the known from the unknowable. When the last traces of daylight slipped behind distant hills and the sky settled into its deep, velvety darkness, people felt the shift in ways we barely imagine today. The world grew quieter, yet nothing felt still. Fires crackled with uneasy rhythm, shadows stretched long across packed earth, and even the wind seemed to carry intentions. Without lamps, windows, or the hum of modern life, people sensed the night as a presence. It pressed against their homes, waited along the edges of forest paths, and filled the spaces where certainty faltered. For them, the night held more than the absence of light. It was a territory shared with spirits, wandering ancestors, and unseen forces that stepped forward when human senses dulled. People listened to distant cries of animals, unsure whether the sound belonged to a fox, a bird, or something older. They watched the flicker of torches, as if those flames were guardians holding back whatever drifted beyond their reach. Every village carried stories of figures glimpsed at dusk, voices heard in empty fields, and footprints found where no one claimed to walk. Because of this, darkness became a teacher and a warning. Families gathered close, drawing comfort from each other as they murmured small, protective phrases inherited through memory rather than writing. Every gesture carried intention, placing a log just so in a fire, shutting a door with a quiet ritual, or leaving a small token near the entrance to keep misfortune outside. These acts were not superstition to them, they were survival. Understanding this ancient relationship with night allows us to see why so many forgotten rituals once formed the backbone of communal life. And it is from this world of living shadows and whispered caution that the first true night practices emerged, guiding people through hours they believed were watched by more than stars. As these habits rooted themselves, communities learned to move with shared caution, setting the stage for the rituals they created to reclaim a sense of order. When the sun slipped away and the world dimmed into blue shadow, ancient families understood that the night demanded its own rituals. Long before written languages and formal religions, people learned to navigate darkness through quiet gestures that helped them feel anchored in a world they could no longer see clearly. Their earliest rituals were not grand ceremonies or fiery spectacles. They were modest acts, repeated so often that no one thought to document them. Yet these small habits reveal more about human fear and longing than any inscription carved in stone. Families gathered around a central flame, believing the fire protected not just their homes but their spirits. Some held their hands toward the light to keep their souls from drifting, while others traced simple patterns on their skin to guard against wandering forces. At thresholds, ashes were sprinkled in thin lines, meant to deter whatever might slip into a dwelling without a body to cast a shadow. These gestures were subtle enough to pass unnoticed, yet powerful enough that entire generations performed them instinctively. Many cultures left food or tokens at the edges of their homes, offerings meant to keep the dead satisfied so they would not wander indoors. Others whispered brief incantations, not out of theatrics, but because the sound of a human voice, steady and familiar, brought comfort in hours when the world seemed shared with unseen company. And when sleep approached, people drew markings near their bedding, quiet symbols shaped from memory rather than writing, meant to protect the boundary between waking and dreams. These practices became nightly rhythms, held in place by fear, hope, and the desire for a peaceful dawn. Because they were universal, they were never considered remarkable enough to record. Their very familiarity made them invisible to history, leaving only faint clues in artifacts and half-remembered stories. Yet in their simplicity lies a map of how our ancestors survived the darkness, how they negotiated with forces they could feel but not define. And as these private habits intertwined with shared beliefs, entire villages began moving as one through the night, creating collective patterns shaped by the same enduring fears. In the oldest settlements, nightfall did not scatter people into isolated routines. Instead, it pulled entire communities into a shared rhythm, as if the village itself breathed with a single set of lungs once the sky turned dark. When the last work of the day was finished, torches were extinguished in a practiced order, one after another, creating a slow descent into darkness that felt almost ceremonial. Only a single flame was left burning at the village's center, a quiet promise that the night would be faced together. Families knew precisely when to close their doors, when to fall silent, and when to listen. These actions weren't commanded, they were inherited, absorbed through generations until they felt instinctive. Some nights, groups of villagers circled the perimeter, murmuring set phrases meant to seal the boundary against wandering forces. On others, the task fell to chosen watchers who climbed wooden towers to observe the silent fields beyond. These individuals were selected not only for their alertness, but for a kind of inner steadiness, a belief that their presence alone could anchor the village's safety. From their elevated posts, they scanned for movement, listening for sounds that didn't belong to an animal, a stranger, or something older that people only hinted at in stories. Within the village itself, silence became part of the ritual. Children were taught that unnecessary noise after dark could draw attention from whatever drifted just beyond the last row of houses. People moved carefully, spoke softly, and treated the night as a space that demanded respect. This nightly choreography turned the settlement into a single, unified being, every gesture synchronized, every pause meaningful. As these communal dances shaped nighttime life, different cultures began developing rituals of their own, hidden practices that would later spread across civilizations and form the strange nighttime traditions we explore next. In the oldest cities of Mesopotamia, long before empires rose or writing hardened into law, the most meaningful rituals happened in silence. As dusk settled over mud brick homes and the last embers of daylight faded from the Tigris and Euphrates, families prepared small offerings meant not for gods in temples, but for the spirits believed to wander the edges of human life. These gestures were quiet, almost invisible to anyone passing through. A bowl of crushed grain placed outside a doorway, a smear of fragrant oil left on a threshold, a cup of water positioned where moonlight could touch it, as though the dead might drink only when reflected night rested on the surface. Most households performed such rites without speaking about them openly. The belief was simple but powerful. If the living ignored the restless would not ignore the living. Ancient texts hint at nights when children were told not to look directly at the offerings, fearing that to witness what consumed them invited trouble. In the narrow alleys between houses, people whispered of night wanderers, unseen forces drawn to scent or light, curious about human warmth. At the crossroads outside city walls, certain individuals later called night whisperers muttered petitions into the dark. They were neither priests nor officials, but ordinary people who believed their words could soften fate. They offered broken pieces of bread or burnt herbs, hoping to divert illness, misfortune, or divine attention. Some clay tablets mentioned punishments for performing such acts in public, suggesting rulers feared any ritual outside official channels. The unseen world, after all, was considered too unpredictable to be approached without permission. Yet, these secret offerings endured for centuries because they gave families a sense of control in a universe governed by capricious gods and shifting omens. Each small gift placed in the night was a promise of protection, a plea for mercy, or a quiet attempt to balance the invisible scales of destiny. And as these hidden practices flourished in the cradle of civilization, other cultures developed their own nocturnal rites nowhere more vividly than in ancient Egypt, where the night was believed to belong to spirits far older than kings. In ancient Egypt, the world after dusk felt strangely alive. As the sun dipped beneath the western horizon, where Egyptians believed the dead began their nightly journey, families prepared quiet rituals meant to guide and protect the car, the spiritual double said to wander when the body slept. These were not the grand ceremonies depicted in temples or carved into stone. They were intimate household customs, practiced in mud brick homes and narrow courtyards, passed down through memory rather than scripture. Families placed small offerings near their doorways, a sip of water, a morsel of bread, a piece of fragrant resin. These simple gifts served two purposes. They welcomed friendly spirits home and discouraged vengeful ones from lingering. Some households set tokens on rooftops, believing the car preferred high, open paths where the night breeze carried whispers from the unseen world. Every object was chosen with care, not out of superstition, but from a long-standing trust in invisible companionship. Before sleep, workers whispered protective formulas, soft lines repeated so quietly they blended with the rustle of palm leaves. Dreams, they believed, were not inventions of the mind but true journeys through delicate realms. Wandering too far, or encountering the wrong spirit, could confuse the soul and delay its return to the body. To prevent this, people touched their chests in small, deliberate gestures meant to anchor the soul inside. These motions appear nowhere in royal inscriptions but surface in fragments from places like Deir el-Medina, where ordinary Egyptians lived close to the desert and even closer to tradition. Parents murmured the names of deities known to guard night travelers, trusting that these divine echoes would light a path through the vulnerable hours of sleep. To them, the night was not an empty stretch of time. It was a sacred corridor the soul passed through carefully, watched by beings both protective and unpredictable. And as Egypt shaped its own intimate dialogue with the darkness, other ancient worlds developed their own forbidden night practices, rituals that later echoed through Greece and Rome, where prophecy and fate were believed to speak loudest after midnight. In the ancient Mediterranean, the quietest hours of the night carried a strange authority. When the streets of Greece and Rome finally emptied and the last tavern lamps were extinguished, certain people slipped away to hidden shrines or lonely crossroads, seeking glimpses of the future. These were not the grand oracles of daylight wrapped in ceremony. Midnight prophecy belonged to those who preferred secrecy, individuals who believed the world spoke more honestly when darkness softened its edges. They carried bowls of clear water, using the reflective surface as a portal where faint images might appear. Oil lamps flickered beside them, flames bending as though responding to unseen currents. A few whispered phrases learned from older relatives, fragments of verses never recorded in official texts. Others simply waited in silence, trusting the night to draw forward the voices of ancestors or guardians willing to offer warnings. Such practices unsettled authorities. Any form of divination performed outside state control threatened stability. A single whispered prophecy could alter loyalties, inspire unrest, or grant influence to those who had no official power. As a result, some empires outlawed these nocturnal rites, pushing them further into the shadows. Yet outlawing something only made it more appealing, and people continued their quiet rituals in kitchens, courtyards, or dim corners of their homes. A bowl of water left beside a sleeping mat, a lamp positioned just so small acts meant to reveal the shape of tomorrow. What is striking is how these methods echoed similar customs across distant cultures. The idea that night unlocked hidden knowledge appears again and again, from the Levant to the far edges of the ancient world. These patterns suggest a shared instinct, that darkness speaks in ways daylight cannot. And as these forbidden practices spread quietly through the Mediterranean, night rituals evolved into forms even more secretive in the medieval world, where fear and faith intertwined in new and unsettling ways. To a medieval family, the home did not offer the sense of safety we imagine today. When sunset lowered itself across the hills and the last hints of daylight drained from the wooden beams overhead, the house seemed to shift into something unfamiliar. Walls creaked, floors groaned, and drafts whispered through small gaps as if carrying messages from places no one wished to know. People understood these sounds, not as simple movements of wood and wind, but as hints that the boundary between worlds had thinned. Night did not merely fall, it entered. Many believed the dead wandered closer after sundown, drifting past windows or slipping through the spaces beneath doors. Witches were said to move freely in darkness, searching for unprotected households or sleepers whose bodies had grown too still. Even the hearth, the warm center of daily life, took on a fragile quality. If its fire died at the wrong hour, families feared it signaled an invitation to unwelcome spirits. To counter these dangers, people performed quiet rituals they rarely spoke about. Some turned household objects to face specific directions, aligning them with protective forces. Others covered polished metal or glass surfaces, convinced reflections could trap or attract wandering souls. Iron tools, knives, keys, or small weights were placed under beds to keep harmful entities from settling too close. Simple prayers whispered before sleep did not always match church teachings, but came from older, inherited lines passed down through generations. Even the way a home was arranged carried meaning. A stool left too near the hearth, a bucket placed beside a door, or a garment draped carelessly could be read as signs of spiritual imbalance. To ignore them invited unease. Medieval families lived with the constant sense that something unseen might be watching, listening, or waiting. And while these private rituals eased the dangers inside, they reminded everyone that the world beyond the doorstep was far more unpredictable. Once a family sealed their home against the dark, the question remained, what waited outside, where no walls stood between the living and the night? For a medieval villager, stepping outside after sunset was an act weighted with risk. Once daylight slipped away and torches dimmed, the world beyond the home transformed into a place that belonged to something else entirely. Roads disappeared into blackness, forests whispered with unseen movement, and even familiar fields felt foreign under the heavy cloak of night. People knew that wolves, thieves, and desperate wanderers posed real threats, but the deeper fear came from what had no face, no clear form, and no predictable path. Across Europe, stories spread of phantom processions drifting through the darkness, armies that marched without bodies, hunters who thundered across the sky, and remnants of the dead passing through villages without leaving footprints. Some claimed to hear distant horns or the clatter of hooves, though nothing physical ever appeared. To encounter such forces was believed to bring misfortune, illness, or a fate stranger than death. So families marked ash lines at their thresholds, small boundaries meant to confuse wandering spirits. Others carried wooden carvings or invoked the names of saints in quiet tones, trusting that a whispered plea might cloak them from harm. Communities formed unofficial curfews, not through command, but through shared dread. When the last evening chores were done, doors shut firmly, and streets emptied until dawn. Only a few dared to travel after dark, midwives called to distant homes, messengers carrying urgent news, and the night watchmen who patrolled village edges. Those forced to walk under moonlight performed careful gestures, touching their clothing or tracing signs meant to blur their presence from whatever moved unseen. Discussing these habits publicly risked accusations of sorcery, so they survived only as secret knowledge passed between those who understood the rules of the night. And while most remained safely indoors, some had no choice but to face the darkness head-on, stepping into a world where human senses offered little protection. These were the watchmen, the silent guardians whose duties began when everyone else retreated from the unknown. Night watchmen stood in a place few others dared to linger. When the village retreated into its shuttered homes and the last voices faded into sleep, these solitary figures began their slow circuits through empty lanes and along quiet borders. They were neither soldiers nor simple labourers. They existed in a liminal space, tasked with facing what everyone else feared. Even their footsteps carried a certain weight, moving carefully so as not to disturb whatever might lurk beyond the reach of their torches. Most watchmen carried small charms or tokens hidden beneath their clothing, fragments of bone, knotted cords, or bits of iron believed to hold protective power. Before beginning their rounds, some whispered brief invocations, asking to remain visible to God, while staying unseen by whatever drifted through the night. These whispered lines rarely appeared in written records, but travellers occasionally mentioned hearing faint murmurs drifting across deserted squares, as if someone carried on a conversation with the darkness itself. Their routes were not random. Old traditions dictated which paths should be walked first, where a watcher should pause to listen, and which corners required a moment of silence. Some sections of a village were avoided entirely during certain phases of the moon. These unwritten rules shaped every movement, forming a ritualistic choreography understood only by those who guarded the night. Villagers both respected and feared the watchman. Children lowered their eyes when one passed during the day, and adults offered curt nods instead of conversation. People sensed that anyone who spent long hours in darkness lived partly in another world, carrying knowledge better left unspoken. And though watchmen rarely shared what they saw or heard, their vigilance allowed others to sleep without imagining the worst. Yet the deeper one goes into history, the clearer it becomes that these guardians were not alone in performing nocturnal rites. Far older traditions shaped night rituals across distant cultures, as the world's earliest shamans stepped into darkness, seeking answers hidden from ordinary eyes. For the world's earliest shamans, the night was not a time to rest. It was the moment when the universe revealed its hidden pathways. As darkness stretched across the land and the last embers of communal fires settled into a soft glow, shamans prepared themselves to step beyond the ordinary. They believed that human senses, softened by night, allowed the spirit to loosen its grip on the physical world. Boundaries thinned. The air felt different. What was invisible by day seemed to wait just beyond the edges of perception. In Siberia, North America, and ancient Eurasia, shamans gathered in dim huts or open clearings, accompanied by rhythmic drumming that pulsed like a heartbeat echoing through the earth. The steady repetition of sound coaxed them into a trance, each beat a gentle push toward a state where the spirit could wander freely. Their breathing slowed, deepened, and synchronized with the drum until it felt as though the entire village breathed with them. In those moments, the night no longer felt empty. It stretched wide, full of presences waiting to be approached. Villages often fell silent during these rituals. People sat reverently at the edges of firelight, understanding that what the shaman attempted required concentration and protection. Children were kept calm. Elders watched the sky for signs. No one raised a voice or made a sudden movement. The shaman's journey was not entertainment, it was a negotiation with the unseen. Spirits, ancestors, animal guides, these forces were said to move freely before dawn, and a shaman learned to navigate their world with patience and humility. The danger lay not in the darkness itself, but in what the shaman might encounter once the spirit stepped away from the body. Some returned with warnings, others brought advice for the seasons ahead, and a few woke slowly, as if part of them had stayed behind in places the living rarely named. These journeys formed the spiritual backbone of many ancient communities, guiding them through winters, migrations, illnesses, and uncertainties. But while the shaman traveled, ordinary families performed their own rituals, quiet acts meant to guard the body still lying close to sleep. While shamans undertook their perilous journeys into the unseen, ordinary families carried out rituals of their own quiet, tender acts meant to keep the soul anchored safely in the body. In many shamanic societies, people believed that sleep loosened the spirit's hold, allowing it to drift into realms where guidance, danger, and deception mingled freely. Dreams were not viewed as fantasies but as voyages, and like any journey, they required protection. As night settled, mothers or elders tied simple knots into short cords, whispering a thought or intention with each loop. These knots were believed to trap wandering spirits or harmful forces that might slip inside during the vulnerable hours of sleep. The cords were placed near the head of a sleeping mat or tucked just beneath a blanket, forming a symbolic barrier between the sleeper and the night beyond. Protective circles were drawn around resting places, sometimes traced with ashes, other times formed with small stones gathered from riverbanks or sacred groves. Each circle served as a boundary, a silent message warning anything wandering through the dark that the soul inside it was claimed and protected. Near the fire pit, families placed carved figures or tokens shaped from bone or wood. These small guardians faced outward, watching for dangers the living could not see. Such rituals were not performed with fear, but with familiar steadiness, woven into the rhythm of each night. People believed that dreams could mislead, that spirits might mimic loved ones, or that an unwary soul could be persuaded to wander too far. Stories passed from one generation to the next described those who woke feeling dimmed, burdened, or not entirely themselves after a night when protection had been forgotten. Yet across continents and centuries, these practices shared remarkable similarities. Whether in the far north or dense forests of the Americas, families understood the same quiet truth. The soul required guidance, and sleep was a threshold where anything might intervene. With these gentle protections set in place, households surrendered to the night, trusting their rituals to hold firm. But not all ceremonies were designed to keep spirits away. Some were created to invite them closer, calling upon forces that stirred most vividly in the hours before dawn. There were nights when protection was not enough. In many ancient cultures, certain hours were believed to open a narrow passage between the living and the unseen, a brief moment when the world held its breath and spirits could be called without resistance. These were not rituals performed out of recklessness or curiosity. They were acts rooted in need, requests for guidance, healing, or answers that daylight could not provide. Shamans prepared for these ceremonies with slow, deliberate movements. Embers from the central fire were arranged in specific patterns, their glow pulsing gently like distant stars. Thin trails of smoke curled upward, carrying whispered names of ancestors into the air. Some shamans stamped the earth in rhythmic footwork, each step marking a path for spirits to follow. Others lifted rattles or carved instruments, using soft, repetitive sounds to signal to the unseen that the living were ready to listen. In some villages, the night demanded perfect silence. People gathered in a circle and breathed together, trusting the shaman to bridge the gap alone. In others, the ritual required chanting, low and steady, creating a vibration said to guide ancestral presences toward the firelight. These gatherings were solemn, not dramatic. No one sought spectacle. They sought connection. When spirits were believed to arrive, the air changed colder, stiller, as though something vast had settled nearby. Messages sometimes came as impressions rather than words, carried through the shaman's altered awareness. People asked for signs about weather, harvests, illness, or choices facing the community. They treated these exchanges with respect, knowing the night gave generously only when approached with humility. And as the last ember dimmed and the shaman guided the spirits back across the threshold, the village slowly exhaled, aware that the same night welcoming their ancestors also held space for the dead. From here, the story turns toward those nighttime moments when the living walked closest to the departed, especially in rituals shaped by loss. Across continents and centuries, countless cultures quietly agreed on one thing: the dead moved more easily through darkness. Night burials were not accidents of convenience, but acts shaped by belief, fear, and reverence. When someone passed, families waited for the sun to slip beneath the horizon before preparing the final journey. Moonlight, soft and undemanding, was thought to guide the newly departed toward their next realm. Daylight, by contrast, was seen as confusing, too bright, too loud, too anchored in the living world. Villages began their burials with slow candle processions, each flame trembling in the night air. Mourners walked in single lines, whispering the name of the deceased so the soul would not forget who it was or where it belonged. The soft chorus of murmured names drifted like a protective blanket, meant to shield the spirit from wandering forces. Along the way, objects were placed carefully around the body stones, to weigh down lingering worries, herbs to deter harmful spirits, and tokens meant to comfort the dead on their path. Burying someone under darkness also served another purpose: secrecy. Some believed the eyes of jealous spirits searched for souls that had not yet settled, and so the cover of night hid the vulnerable moment between death and release. Others feared that the living might disturb the process if they watched too closely, or that the presence of certain individuals could complicate the soul's departure. Night became a veil, protecting both sides of the threshold. These customs, though varied in detail, revealed a shared human anxiety, the fear of an unfinished transition. No one wanted a soul trapped between worlds, confused or tethered by unresolved ties. Night burials promised clarity, the darkness provided direction, and the moon, patient and ancient, became a silent witness to the quietest crossings. With the burial complete, communities turned their focus to the rituals that followed vigils, mourning practices, and the long nights spent listening for signs that the dead had truly found their way. In many ancient communities, the night after a death carried a weight unlike any other. Families gathered around the body, not only to honor their loved one, but to guard the fragile space between life and the unknown. They believed that during these hours, the soul was still near, hesitant and impressionable, vulnerable to spirits searching for company. To fall asleep during this time was considered dangerous. Sleep opened its own doorway, and mourners feared that drifting into dreams while the dead lingered nearby could blur the boundary between their journeys. Candlelight guided these vigils. Flames were arranged in circles, lines, or spirals depending on local custom, each pattern meant to illuminate a path or create a shield. The soft glow settled over faces drawn with grief, flickering gently as hymns rose and fell in slow rhythm. These songs were rarely loud. They moved like breath, steady and low, weaving a protective barrier around the body and those who watched. In many homes, mirrors were covered and water vessels overturned. Reflections were thought to trap wandering souls, while still water might invite them to settle where they did not belong. Some cultures instructed mourners to walk in circles around the resting place, repeating quiet phrases to confuse or deter unwanted spirits. The circular movement symbolized unity, a protective ring formed by the living to secure the dead's passage. Others sat entirely still, believing stillness itself created the calm required for a peaceful departure. Every gesture, however small, carried intention, each one designed to guide the soul gently onward, while keeping the living rooted safely in their world. The night wore on slowly during these vigils. Time felt stretched, as if the world paused to wait for the final separation to occur. Families listened for subtle changes in the air, signs that the soul had begun to drift away. Only when dawn approached, when the first grey light touched the edges of the sky, did the tension ease. And yet, not every vigil ended cleanly. Some mornings brought uneasy signs, hints that the soul had not fully departed. In those moments, communities turned to a different set of rituals, practices meant to quiet the restless and restore balance. Even after the burial and the vigil, some families sensed that the dead had not fully departed. A lingering chill in a doorway, a candle flame bending without breeze, a dream that felt too vivid, these small signs convinced many that a spirit remained nearby, unsettled or unwilling to move on. To ease this uneasy presence, communities turned to rituals meant to soothe, guide, or gently push the spirit toward its rightful path. One of the simplest remedies involved offerings placed at thresholds or windowsills. Bowls of grain, small cups of water, or bits of fragrant herbs were left out overnight, meant to reassure the wandering soul that it was remembered and cared for. In other regions, families drew thin lines of salt across doorframes or around sleeping spaces. Salt, seen as pure and incorruptible, created boundaries no restless spirit was believed able to cross. Smoke played an important role as well. Bundles of dried herbs, juniper, sage, or resinous branches were burned slowly, their aroma drifting through rooms like a soft command. People walked the perimeter of their homes, letting the smoke settle into corners where shadows seemed too deep. They believed the scent could loosen a spirit's attachment, encouraging it to continue its journey. Ritual songs were another remedy. These were not morning hymns, but soft, repetitive melodies sung late at night. Each note acted as a guide, a thread weaving through darkness to lead the spirit away from the living. Sometimes a single family sang, other times an entire village hummed together, creating a gentle current meant to carry the lingering soul forward. By dawn, if the signs quieted, families felt the balance had been restored. But with the dead finally at peace, attention turned back to the living and to the secret night rituals practiced by women whose knowledge shaped the unseen rhythms of their world. Under the thin edge of a new moon, when the sky appeared almost starless and the world felt suspended between breaths, women across ancient cultures gathered quietly in hidden places. These nights were not chosen for spectacle, they were chosen for their emptiness. A new moon offered no light, no guidance, no witnesses, only a blank sky under which intentions could be planted like seeds. In ancient Rome, on islands in the Aegean, and in remote corners of Asia, women slipped from their homes with whispered excuses, moving softly along familiar paths until they reached a secluded field, a grove, or a rooftop warmed by the previous day's sun. Here, in the darkest hours, they performed rituals almost no official record dared to name. A bowl of water might be placed where a faint glimmer of moonlight touched it, creating a reflection not of the sky, but of whoever leaned over the surface. Women spoke their wishes into clay vessels, believing the earth absorbed their words and carried them into the unseen. Thin cords were tied into deliberate knots, each knot meant to bind misfortune, seal strength, or protect a child who had not yet drawn their first breath. Circles were walked slowly, the soft crunch of footsteps forming patterns meant to clear emotional burdens that lingered in the household. These gatherings were usually small, 3 women, 5, sometimes more, but always held in careful secrecy. The danger was not in the rituals themselves, but in how easily they could be misunderstood. A society shaped by rigid structures feared anything that occurred outside the public eye. And so these rites survived through whispers, through memory, through bonds of trust shared between wives, sisters, and daughters. For many, the new moon became a space of release, a place where responsibilities lightened and inner voices were allowed to rise. These nights did not challenge authority outright, yet men spoke of them with nervous curiosity. Something about the quiet unity of women beneath a moonless sky felt powerful, even if its purpose was healing rather than rebellion. And when the new moon passed, another kind of darkness soon followed, one that demanded rituals even more guarded, practiced only in the deepest hours of night. In many ancient communities, water changed its nature once darkness settled. During the day, it was practical, something to drink, something to wash with, something to cross. But at night, it became a threshold. Women understood this more deeply than anyone. They approached rivers, wells, and quiet bowls of water with a reverence that came from generations of whispered teachings. Under faint moonlight or complete darkness, water seemed to breathe differently, its surface holding still as though waiting for a question. These midnight rituals were gentle, almost tender. A woman might kneel beside a stream and let her fingertips drift across the surface, tracing slow, deliberate patterns meant to call forward clarity or ward away what troubled her heart. Some dropped herbs, grains, or small petals into the water, watching how they floated or sank, reading meaning in the slightest movement. Others leaned close and spoke softly, trusting that water so quick to carry sound would deliver their words where they needed to go. It was said that water at night could reveal truths hidden in daylight, offering glimpses of emotional futures, warnings of sickness, or signs of shifting fortunes. These practices survived far outside written history. Chroniclers rarely recorded them, either because they considered them unimportant or because they understood too well how disruptive such knowledge could be. Instead, these rituals traveled from mother to daughter, concealed beneath everyday moments. A girl fetching water at dusk might learn how to read reflections. A bride moving into a new home might be shown how to whisper protection into a basin before sleep. The secrecy was not shame, it was preservation. To many, these rituals felt powerful enough to unsettle those who preferred women to remain silent. Water had a way of revealing inner truths, and truth was not always convenient. Yet for the women who practiced these rites, the midnight hours offered a rare sense of sovereignty. Water reflected not the world as it was, but the world as it might become, shimmering with possibility in the thin moonlight. And while reflection carried its own quiet strength, another form of night ritual relied not on water, but on the earth itself, on herbs gathered in darkness, touched by secrets older than memory. In many parts of the medieval world, certain plants were believed to awaken only after darkness fell. Their strength, people said, was drawn not from sunlight but from the quiet energies that drifted through the night. Women who understood this slipped from their homes when the moon rose, carrying small knives, woven baskets, and a knowledge older than the villages they lived in. They were known in whispers as night-gatherers figures, both respected and feared. They sought plants touched by moonlight. Mugwort for clarity, yarrow for protection, rue for banishing illness, and henbane for rituals that required deep spiritual grounding. These herbs were said to hold their strongest properties after dusk, when the world turned inward and the boundary between the living and the unseen thinned. Women harvested them gently, using specific gestures to honor the plant before cutting it. Some circles required a whispered phrase, others demanded silence, believing sound might startle the spirit of the herb. To the women who practiced these rites, this work was neither mystical nor rebellious. It was survival. A well-timed plant could soothe fever, ease childbirth, or protect a home. Yet their nighttime journeys raised suspicion among male authorities, who saw the combination of women, darkness, and hidden knowledge as dangerous. A woman who understood herbs too well could be labeled troublesome. A woman who gathered them at night might be called something worse. This tension wrapped night gatherers in an aura of quiet danger. They learned to move carefully, to return home before dawn, and to keep their practices tucked into the folds of everyday life. Their baskets held more than plants, they carried the secrets of healing, resilience, and intuition passed down through generations. With these forbidden herbs gathered under moonlight, women prepared themselves and their families for the unseen challenges of the night rituals that lead us naturally to the cleansing rites that shaped entire communities. In the old world, night cleansing began with fire. When the day's final voices faded and the house settled into its gentle creaks, families turned to smoke and embers to soothe whatever the darkness stirred. Fire, even in its quietest form, was believed to hold a purity that no other element could match. A single spark carried memory, intention, and protection, reaching into corners where shadows gathered too easily. Women or elders selected herbs with great care: sage to steady the mind, juniper to drive out lingering sorrow, cedar to strengthen the heart. These bundles were placed on small embers until the first curls of smoke rose, soft and pale, drifting like a whispered prayer. The smoke was guided through doorways, across window edges, and into the quiet spaces under rafters. Families murmured protective phrases as they walked, though some traditions required silence, believing the smoke itself carried the necessary message. In certain households, Glowing embers were carried around the perimeter of the home in small clay bowls, each careful step meant to form a shield against whatever might slip near during the night. If someone had suffered a troubling dream, or returned from a long journey feeling unsettled, smoke was waved gently around them, tracing slow patterns meant to untangle the shadows clinging to their spirit. The warmth of the embers, the rhythm of the movements, and the scent of the herbs worked together to calm the mind in ways people could feel, but not fully explain. These rituals were never dramatic. They unfolded with the tenderness of familiar routine, shaped by the belief that smoke bridged the realm of the living and the world of ancestors. The drifting trails were thought to push harmful forces away, while inviting protection from those who still watched over the family from beyond. Fragments of these customs survive today, scattered through modern practices but softened and stripped of their original depth. In ancient nights, cleansing rituals were less about superstition and more about emotional survival, a way to navigate sorrow, fear, and uncertainty when no other language existed for such burdens. And as smoke faded into the darkness, families often turned to a different power, water, which held its own quiet wisdom when night gathered around it. Across many ancient cultures, water was believed to change at night. Once touched by moonlight, it became something more than a simple element, something capable of absorbing what the day had left behind. Families in East Asia, Northern Europe, and distant river communities practiced quiet water rituals meant to reset the household, as if clearing away spiritual dust that collected when no one was looking. These rites were never loud. They belonged to soft footsteps, whispered intentions, and the steady rhythm of hands working in silence. Some households began by sprinkling salt at their doorways. Salt, incorruptible and enduring, was thought to create a barrier no harmful presence could cross. A thin line of white crystals glimmered faintly in the dark, offering reassurance even when fear pressed against the edges of thought. Others swept small amounts of water across thresholds, believing that moving liquid carried unwanted energy out into the night, washing the entrance clean for the next dawn. In certain villages, bowls of water were placed in corners, quiet sentinels set to absorb whatever emotional residue lingered in the air. There were rituals where people leaned close to water and spoke softly into it, letting their words settle on the surface before the liquid was poured along the base of walls or left beneath a window. These whispered intentions were thought to charge the water, giving it purpose. A family might ask for protection, clarity, or simply a peaceful night. The next morning, the water was discarded outside, far from the home, ensuring whatever it carried would not return. Salt often accompanied these routines. A pinch scattered near bedposts, a handful kept in a small bowl by the door, or a narrow line traced beneath a windowsill. People believed salt absorbed what they could not name: anxieties, tensions, memories too heavy to hold. In this way, cleansing became a form of quiet emotional care, allowing families to feel renewed in a world that offered few other comforts. Once the home was reset, there remained one final space to cleanse, the body and mind themselves, which also carried shadows gathered from the day's burdens. In the ancient world, a bath taken at night was far more than a way to wash the body. Under moonlight, water was believed to soften, taking on a gentler quality that made it capable of lifting burdens the day had pressed into the spirit. People approached these nighttime baths slowly, as if stepping into a moment outside of ordinary time. The world around them quieted, allowing the mind to loosen its grip on worry and the heart to release what it had carried too heavily. Herbs were often added to the water: lavender for calming restless thoughts, chamomile to ease sorrow, mint to refresh the spirit, or mugwort to prepare the mind for meaningful dreams. As the herbs released their scent, the steam rising from the water became part of the ritual, a silent companion that wrapped itself around the bather like a gentle reassurance. Some stood at the edge of the water and breathed deeply before entering, trusting the night to hold them while they let go. Immersion was slow and deliberate. Many believed that sinking beneath the surface allowed the water to pull away regrets, fears, and emotional residue that clung stubbornly to the skin. People stayed until their breath matched the quiet rhythm of the night, until thoughts thinned and the body felt lighter. When they finally rose from the water, the act of drying carried its own symbol. Cloth was pressed gently along the limbs, sealing the cleansing so that whatever had been released would not return. Some let their hair dry in the night air, believing it helped the spirit settle calmly before sleep. These rituals were not luxuries, they were emotional necessities, a way to prepare for rest when the world offered few other forms of comfort. And with bodies renewed and spirits steadied, people turned toward the next nightly task, inviting the forces meant to guard them until morning. Long before sleep was softened by locked doors or electric lights, people surrounded themselves with small objects meant to guard the vulnerable hours of the night. These items were humble tools, stones, bits of woven thread, yet each carried a weight of meaning shaped by generations who understood that darkness held its own customs. As families prepared for rest, these objects became silent companions, arranged with care beside sleeping mats or tucked beneath blankets where unseen eyes could not disturb them. Iron was among the most trusted protectors. A simple tool, a key, or a small blade placed near the bed was believed to interrupt harmful forces drifting through the room. Some set a knife beneath their mattress, so its sharp edge could cut through spiritual threats before they reached the sleeper. Others kept a horseshoe or iron nail close at hand, trusting the metal's cold strength to repel whatever crossed the boundary between waking and dreams. Charms woven from thread or plant fibers hung above sleeping spaces, their knots and loops intended to trap nightmares before they reached the mind. In certain regions, polished stones or river-worn pebbles were placed near pillows, chosen for their calming energy and believed to absorb the weight of troubling dreams. Wooden carvings, often simple figures shaped by local artisans, were positioned to face doorways, their silent watchfulness meant to deter wandering spirits or uninvited visitors. These objects did more than guard the night. They anchored the sleeper's heart, offering reassurance in a world where rest was a moment of surrender. To lie down without protection felt reckless. To sleep without intention felt dangerous. People understood that the night could cradle or unsettle, depending on how one approached it. Even today, fragments of these old habits remain keepsakes near a pillow, a light left on, a cherished object carried into sleep without explanation. They echo the same impulse, to feel safe when consciousness fades and the world grows quiet. And while objects created a protective circle around the body, many cultures believed that sound held its own kind of power. From whispered lines to rhythmic chants, the night soon became guarded by voices meant to keep danger at a distance. Across cultures and centuries, people learned that the voice carried a quiet kind of power, especially in the moments before sleep, when the mind loosened its grip on the world and drifted toward dreams. Night chants and whispered prayers became a final act of intention, small threads of sound woven around the body like an invisible shield. These weren't loud invocations or dramatic performances. They were nearly inaudible, meant only for the darkness, the sleeper, and whatever unseen forces might be listening. In medieval Europe, people murmured short phrases passed down through families, lines repeated so often they became part of the rhythm of nightly life. A whisper near the pillow, a soft breath into the cold air, these simple words were believed to steady the heart and keep wandering spirits from drawing too close. The sound itself mattered as much as the meaning. A phrase spoken with steady breath was thought to create a subtle resonance that lingered even after the speaker had fallen asleep. In ancient Asian traditions, rhythmic chants helped ease the mind into stillness. These chants weren't meant to summon anything, they were designed to release the weight of the day. Slow syllables rose and fell like waves, guiding the listener toward a calmer inner space. People believed that the final sound they made before sleep shaped the first dream they entered, giving the night a direction rather than leaving it to chance. Shamanic cultures used hum-like tones, soft vibrations meant to harmonize the body with surrounding energies. These low sounds were believed to close openings that might leave the sleeper vulnerable. A well-placed hum could seal the spirit inside, ensuring it traveled safely through dream realms and returned without confusion. These rituals rarely found their way into written records. They were too personal, too intimate, too ordinary for chroniclers to consider. But for those who practiced them, the voice became a companion, gentle, protective, familiar. And once the final whisper faded, another ritual waited, the delicate moment when the last flame of the night was extinguished and darkness claimed the room completely. In many ancient households, the last light of the night was treated with a reverence modern eyes rarely recognize. As the room settled into quiet and the air cooled around the fading flame, people understood that this small moment held meaning. Fire had guarded them through the hours of waking, but once the final ember dimmed, the night claimed its full shape. Because of this, the extinguishing of a flame became a ritual, an intimate transition between the world of action and the world of dreams. Some watched the embers closely, letting their gaze soften as patterns formed in the glow. They believed the shifting reds and golds revealed hints about their inner state, guiding them toward peace or warning them of unrest. Others traced shapes in the air above the flame, slow movements meant to seal the space and protect the mind from troubling visions. A hand passing gently through warm air could symbolize clearing away whatever lingered from the day. The act of blowing out a candle was rarely done without care. In some regions, people never blew at all. They pinched the wick or used a small lid, believing the breath carried its own energy and might disturb the night's balance. Elsewhere, a whisper accompanied the final flicker, a phrase spoken so softly it blended with the fading light itself. The moment the flame disappeared was a threshold, a brief pause where the world felt suspended. How the light died mattered. A flame extinguished too abruptly was thought to invite restless dreams. A flame dimmed slowly promised a gentler night. Families learned to read these small signs, trusting them more than they trusted the shifting darkness outside. And once the room surrendered fully to shadow, another kind of vigilance began, the rituals carried out not for sleep, but to guard the entire night. Across the world, long before clocks divided the night into hours, certain people were chosen to remain awake while others slept. These night watchers carried responsibilities that reached far beyond patrolling darkened paths or guarding livestock. They were guardians of thresholds, figures who monitored the invisible seams where danger, misfortune, and wandering forces were believed to slip into human life. In every culture, these sentinels became the living boundary between the safety of the community and the vast uncertainty of the night. In tribal regions, watchers sat near fires or perched on ridgelines, listening for sounds that did not belong. They were trained to recognize the difference between an animal's cry, a shifting wind, and the subtle changes believed to signal ancestral messages. Some nights, they remained absolutely still. Other nights, they moved in careful patterns, tracing routes taught by elders who understood that certain areas were never to be crossed after dusk. These boundaries were not marked by stone or rope, they existed in memory, held in place by stories that warned of dangers waiting just beyond the familiar. In monasteries, monks performed chants at set intervals through the night. Each chant was a small flame of presence, a reminder that consciousness had not abandoned the world entirely. Their voices rose gently through corridors and courtyards, keeping sorrow, temptation, and spiritual imbalance at bay. The rhythm of their nightly duty aligned with cosmic cycles, reinforcing the belief that order had to be maintained even when darkness pressed close. Villages relied on figures who walked quiet perimeters, observing the land for omens, an animal acting strangely, a sudden hush in the wind, a shadow that lingered too long. These watchers carried charms or symbols they were sworn to protect. Some paused at specific trees or stones, honoring old agreements believed to keep the night calm. Societies projected their collective fears onto these individuals because someone had to face the questions no one else wished to confront. What moved in the dark? What listened? What might enter if no one watched? Yet not all watchers guarded physical borders. Many protected the spiritual realm itself, those whose wakefulness shaped the dreams and destinies of the sleeping world. In many ancient traditions, sleep was not viewed as a gentle descent into rest. It was understood as a journey into territories where the soul wandered freely, exposed to forces that moved silently through the night. Because of this, some cultures appointed dream guardians, individuals whose responsibility was to remain awake while others slept. Their presence created an anchor, a small point of stability in a world where dreams and spirits blurred into the same landscape. These guardians sat close to the sleeper, watching the slow rise and fall of breath, as though it were a fragile signal that might shift at any moment. Some kept a candle burning beside the bed, believing the light acted as a guide for the returning soul. The flame's steady glow helped prevent confusion, ensuring the dreamer would not lose their way or drift too far from the body that waited for them. Soft chants were often part of the ritual. These weren't meant to wake the sleeper, but to maintain a subtle rhythm in the space around them. A guardian might repeat a simple phrase, humming it almost under their breath, creating a thread of sound the dreamer could follow through unfamiliar layers of the night. In certain traditions, guardians touched a sleeper's hand at intervals, reminding the wandering spirit that someone in the waking world still held them. Dreams were considered powerful but unpredictable. They could reveal truths, offer warnings, or open doorways better left closed. Without someone awake to steady the space, the dreamer risked encountering entities able to mislead or frighten them. A disturbed dream, one marked by sudden movement or troubled breathing, signaled the guardian to act. Smoke might be waved gently, or a charm placed near the sleeper's head to redirect whatever presence had slipped too close. To guard another's dreams was to walk the edge of two worlds, the visible one lit by firelight, and the hidden one shaped by shifting shadows and quiet echoes. It was a task that demanded patience, intuition, and a willingness to confront what others felt only in sleep. But even with dream guardians, nights could unravel. When disturbances rippled through a household, strange sounds, uneasy dreams, or sudden chills, another set of rituals emerged. Meant to reset the night before, it deepened into something more troubling. Some nights unraveled without warning. A dream too sharp, a sound too sudden, a chill that crossed a room without reason. Any of these could convince a family that the balance of the night had been disturbed. In ancient households, people understood these moments not as accidents, but as signs that something had brushed too close. When this happened, the night had to be reset, gently but decisively, before fear settled into the walls. The first step was often light. A fire that had dwindled too low was relit, its glow restoring a sense of orientation. Flames were believed to push back whatever had slipped in, and the act of tending them steadied the heart. Some swept doorways again, even if they had already done so before sleep. A few strokes of a broom across the threshold symbolically erased any traces left by wandering forces. Protective words were spoken softly, phrases repeated enough times to create a familiar rhythm, something strong enough to mend the night's frayed edges. These murmurs weren't formal prayers. They were fragments of memory, lines learned from elders who had faced similar disturbances. Spoken in calm, steady breaths, they helped families reclaim the silence. Objects near the bed were rearranged or replaced entirely. A stone moved closer to the pillow. A charm turned to face a different direction. A knife or iron tool shifted a few inches. These subtle adjustments gave people the sense that they were participating in their own safety, regaining agency when the darkness felt unpredictable. After these small rites, the atmosphere usually softened. The night no longer felt like an adversary, but like a space that had been gently coaxed back into order. And as families lay down again, they carried the quiet understanding that ancient fears still echo in modern minds, an echo that leads us toward the final chapter, where old night terrors meet the struggles of our sleepless age. For all our modern comforts, the dark still stirs something ancient inside us. We tell ourselves that night holds no real danger anymore, that our doors are locked, our streets are lit, and our walls are strong. Yet when the world quiets and the lights go out, the mind remembers older truths. Thoughts sharpen, worries stretch into shapes we didn't notice during the day, and the smallest sound can make the heart pause for just a beat longer than usual. We may not fear the dark openly, but our bodies behave as though it still hides everything our ancestors once imagined. This lingering unease is not weakness, it is inheritance. For thousands of years, darkness signaled vulnerability. Night was the moment predators moved, spirits wandered, and human senses lost their confidence. Entire civilizations built rituals to soothe the mind before sleep, whispers, charms, fires, circles of protection, because the night demanded preparation. Though we no longer perform these rites consciously, the instincts behind them never fully faded. They echo in the way we double-check a locked door, the way we leave a hallway light glowing, or the way silence feels heavier after midnight. Late-night overthinking is simply a modern version of ancient vigilance. When the lights dim, the brain becomes alert, scanning for threats it can no longer name. Restlessness, too, is a memory of the nights when sleep was unsafe, when someone needed to stay awake to watch over the others. Even insomnia carries the shape of old fears, the sense that we must remain aware, even when the world tells us we are secure. We live in brighter nights now, wrapped in technology and timekeeping, yet the deeper rhythms of our minds follow patterns written long before electricity. The darkness still speaks to something primal, something that listens for danger even when none exists. And so our nights continue to echo with ancient habits, resurfacing quietly in moments we often dismiss. Understanding this connection invites us to look at our modern behaviors differently. Many of the things we do without thinking, small rituals, lingering hesitations, comforting gestures, did not arise from nowhere. They are fragments of old protections, subtle reminders of the ways our ancestors survived the dark. Even in the modern world, without realizing it, we carry ancient rituals into our nightly routines. They appear harmless, practical, even mundane, yet beneath their familiar motions lies a lineage stretching back through thousands of years. When you walk through your home checking locks before bed, you are not simply ensuring safety. You are echoing the old custom of sealing a dwelling against whatever wandered outside after sunset. Each click of a deadbolt mirrors the ash lines and protective symbols once drawn across thresholds. The same happens when you adjust blankets just so, tucking in corners, or smoothing the fabric until it feels right. Long ago, people arranged coverings with intention, securing them like boundaries meant to keep the spirit anchored and the night at bay. Today, we repeat the gestures without naming their origins, guided by instinct rather than belief. Turning off lights follows its own ritual rhythm. Some people feel uneasy leaving a room in total darkness and turn lights off in a sequence, one here, one there, gradually dimming the world. This mirrors the way ancient households extinguished flames in careful order, believing the pattern shaped the night that followed. Even the habit of leaving a lamp glowing in a hallway or near a door carries echoes of those single flames once kept alive to guide wandering souls safely home. Then there is the moment before sleep, when the mind cycles through final thoughts. Did I close the window? Did I shut the stove? Did I leave something undone? These check-ins resemble the whispered lists our ancestors murmured into the dark, recounting protections to reassure themselves before surrendering to dreams. The patterns persist because the feeling does. The desire to enter sleep with nothing lurking at the edges of awareness. We move through these gestures without assigning them meaning, yet they bind us to people long vanished, those who feared the night for reasons we no longer remember, and those who found comfort in tiny acts of order. In recognizing this inheritance, we begin to see our evenings differently, as quiet rituals that connect us to a deeper human story. And from this recognition, a final question rises. What might happen if we treated the night not as an adversary, but as something sacred once more? Long before temples were built or prayers were written down, the night served as humanity's first sacred space. Darkness wrapped early people in a stillness they could not find during the noise of daylight. It was in this quiet, beneath starlit skies and gentle moonlight, that our ancestors learned to listen to their fears, their hopes, and the faint rhythms of a world larger than themselves. Night gave them room to wonder, to question, to reach toward forces they could sense but not define. Every ritual they created grew from that vast, open silence. Even now, with our bright windows and humming machines, the night has not lost its ancient power. When the world dims and the distractions fade, something in us softens. Thoughts rise that stayed hidden during the day. Feelings we set aside finally find room to breathe. The darkness becomes a canvas for reflection, a place where the mind can wander gently without needing to perform. We may no longer burn herbs at our doorways or whisper charms into bowls of water, yet we still treat the night as a time apart. We still lower our voices, we still move more carefully. We still sense that something meaningful stirs beneath the quiet. In this way, the night connects us to everyone who lived before us. The same darkness that surrounded ancient families surrounds us now. The same instinct that made them gather close makes us pause when the world grows still. Their rituals were shaped by survival, but they also carried tenderness, a desire for peace, clarity, and protection. Those desires remain unchanged. As this journey through forgotten practices comes to a close, we return to a simple truth. The night has always belonged to us. It holds our oldest memories, our quietest fears, and our deepest reflections. And in its darkness, we find not emptiness, but continuity, a reminder that we, too, are part of an ancient story still unfolding.